Welcome to the CMS Cuts 2023. I'm Roderick Tung, and this is Heart Rhythm TV. This is our 5th week, and we continue to fight. Constant work with Capitol Counsel and our task force, constantly working feverishly with the Heart Rhythm Society Board of Trustees, our President Andrew Krahn, who will be joining us shortly on Voices, and also the grassroots efforts led by John Garner, Scott Greenberg, DJ Lacrede, raising money with the EP Advocacy Foundation and continually to grow as we now work with Capitol Counsel and Actum, two lobbyists, companies and firms, to be able to help us target specific congressmen and get opportunities to educate our policymakers on the field of electrophysiology. We actually had the pleasure of meeting with the Department of Health and Human Services to discuss what this means to electrophysiologists, what our field is, and what this does for patients, and how patient access would be severely compromised. The major talking point this week, however, has really been aligning the ask with the American College of Cardiology. It's clear that both organizations are on the same page in terms of determining that we need fair reimbursement and none of these cuts are acceptable. What's also very clear is we need a very specific ask now. And I'm very pleased to have Andrew Krahn, our fearless Heart Rhythm Society president, to talk about those discussions. You've had a lot of interactions with Dr. Fry. Welcome, Andrew Krahn.
Oh, thanks, Rod. It's really good to be here. Thanks for the invite.
So a lot of this has been after hours and separate conversations, then conversations with CMS and ACC coming together. This is a question of the specific ask. Andrew, take us through the process of determining what we're asking for.
So, let's start with the premise that, the board supported the idea that we need to be ambitious about where we're headed with this. And we also knew that we were building up to a meeting with CMS, which was, in their terms, a listening meeting, where they were asking us for what our pitch was, what we were trying to advocate for. So we had a couple of meetings with ACC in advance, and obviously internal HRS meetings to discuss and think about that. And one of the things that became clear was that although CMS warrants an education about our field and the value and access, it also is seeking an actual counter proposal. They're looking for something they can get their teeth into that could be actionable, a place to land. Because if we leave it as we're unhappy, we're another group of disgruntled individuals, but they've already got a draft decision in front of them. So those meetings with ACC worked down to saying something granular that was based on precedent that they could understand, that was kind of within the frame of the math they're accustomed to in looking at RUC recommendations, working through that to come up with what they think they're going to decide. So we had those pre-meetings Friday, Sunday, Monday, and then met with CMS on Tuesday. And we feel like we had a very good meeting. In terms of the specifics of what happened, we had a group of people from both ACC and HRS presenting both the value, our concerns about the process that had happened, our grave concerns about the proposed cuts as being draconian and really hurting the field of EP and patients' access to ablation. And part of the counter proposal, the sort of finish of the process, was to say, where could this land? And if you think about it, the worst case scenario is the CMS proposed cuts. Next are the RUC recommendations. Next would be where we are at right now after one round of cuts. And so we asked ourselves, what would bring us aligned with, albeit maybe not identical to what the 21 levels were? And the answer is actually a bit of math. And part of the math is that the RUC recommendations that go forward are based on the 25th percentile of estimates of time. And so when you think about it, when you see the numbers of what's been presented, that 25th percentile means 3/4 of your cases are longer than that. And that's why members say, well, there's no way that most of our AF ablations are happening in under 200 minutes. It doesn't work that way. And the reality is that's not actually the numbers they were using. And so it turns out that actually the median numbers, which are more reflective of the procedure across the spectrum, not only are they something that is tangible, but in fact, the RVUs associated with this are substantially closer to the 21 levels. They're pretty darn close, particularly for SVT and AF ablation. And so by using that median number concept, which is not their usual way, They normally work off the 25th percentile, but there are exceptions. And so that draws on precedent. It gives them something specific that they have in front of them in terms of the numbers and so on. And so we advocated that those median levels for those ablation codes would be a feasible way for them to acknowledge the fact that the procedures are more complex, there's more risk, and although our efficiency gains are evident in the time, there's much more to it than time. For what it's worth, CMS doesn't say very much at these meetings. What they did say in return was, thank you, we learned something. This has been insightful for where we see the limitations of our proposed decision-making process, and we'll take this into account. They don't normally tip their hand or negotiate at this kind of meeting, and so we felt it was as good as it could have gone. And it was a really good message of solidarity and synergy with ACC, because we went into it together and kind of back and forth without a real discrimination that we were aligned organizations.
Well, Andrew, I think we should first celebrate where we're at, because we've been doing this now. We've been at this for 5 weeks. And in the beginning, it was obviously the outrage, the almost depression, the feeling that the field is going to be eliminated, and then trying to figure out if Heart Rhythm Society cares. And then the voices came out and the emotions came out. And clearly we established alignment. Then we have allies, we have Capitol Counsel, we have a second lobbying firm, we've got grassroots. Then we all said it was going to be fair reimbursement. Now we're finally saying, let's not be 99% we've got a problem. Let's be a lot more solution oriented. And now we have a solution which potentially with ACC is aligned to work towards that median RUC recommendation, which would be exceptional, because that's not traditional. But we believe that that is a common ground that we would all feel comfortable with. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's very fair. I think to use the ACC terminology, this is a bold ask, because it is asking, but it's helping them see a process by which they could respond and agree to that ask. For many EPs, we all grew up fairly math and engineering oriented. That's our predisposition. We know that the devil's in the details and you need to see the numbers. And what we're working on right now is essentially creating those. There's 2 tables that really walk people through what the numbers look like and what it means, and how those different proposals sort of have different values for the RVUs for the individual procedures. We know that's necessary, but it needs to be collated, taped, and made sure that it's in a format that members can readily digest. And that's going to happen over the next near term. We're first working through some of the formal part of that through the board, and then that will come out to the broad membership in the next few days. And I'm excited about that, because I think we all feel more comfort in something that's a bit tangible, we understand.
And it doesn't really try to dissociate from the RUC process, which is a time-honored, tradition in terms of how this is done. And when you start making arguments completely outside of the normal process, outside other processes that other subspecialties abide by, I think that's the whole point, is that it might decrease our grounds in order to make an argument, a rational argument for.
Yeah, I think the other part of it that we don't need to go into in great detail is some aspects of this whole process reflect a long game, right? We're in a busy short game, but the long game is around the question of whether the whole compensation model is sensible. It really reflects value. It takes into account the importance of things like procedures on the patient journey. And good examples are not very many people do curative things like we do. And so asking ourselves how that impacts on population health, that's a big deal. But a short-term negotiation like this doesn't take that kind of thing into account.
So let me put this in perspective. So for the ones that are so passionate, that feel that no cuts are justifiable at all, and I, for one, think that we actually should have increased reimbursement, because the data has never been better. And the outcomes for patients, decrease in hospitalization, decrease in medications, mortality benefit, I would be the type that says, well, I don't want to accept any cut. And then you've got the worst case scenario, which is the cut. Then you've got second best, which is the RUC recommendation. We're hitting somewhere in the middle ground, right, Andrew?
Yeah, I think so. But on the other hand, after the first batch of cuts, we are at the 22 level. And this is actually a bump between the 21 level and 22. So this is the small concession that a cut's inevitable from the standpoint of we're not being unrealistic, but we're trying to give them something to land on that's as close as we can to the 21 destination as we would like to be.
Well, at least we're getting on the same page. It's clear that there has to be an ask. We're getting much closer to that. So we're moving along very nicely in our process. Stay tuned, everyone, and thank you, Andrew, for joining us.
You betcha.